You boys be quiet down there!
Welcome back to PC98 Paradise, the series where we take a close look at classic games for the NEC PC98, the most popular Japanese PC series of the early 1990s. Well, you saw the thumbnail. Today's game is a fighting game RPG. Maybe you can name a few games you might describe as a fighting game RPG, but today's game is literally an early 90s overhead JRPG where random battle encounters have been replaced by one-on-one fighting game battles. Maybe not good fighting game battles, but I found it to be a decent RPG with an interesting storyline and characters, so you're gonna want to stick around and see what it's all about. It also happens to be the first game ever released by TGL, one of my favorite PC98 developers, and the company behind the Farland Stories series I've also covered on this channel. So today, let's learn all about Sword Dancer. This is a pretty common PC98 title you'll find on the used market. It was a minor hit since both RPGs and fighting games were huge in Japan when it was released in 1992. While all of TGL's other games came in plastic cases, this came in a fancier laminated cardboard case. Inside, first we have a survey card and then an advertisement flyer for the game, which might seem weird advertising the game to people who already bought it, but it also mentions a drawing you can enter to win a Roland MIDI set. The other flyer is for a word processing application made by TGL called Graphic Word Done. Now we get to the manual, which unlike most of TGL's manuals is in full color. There's a list of moves for all playable characters, and in the back there's sheet music for the main melody of the opening theme. Finally, the game itself is stored on 6 floppy disks, consisting of the system disk, opening disk, visual disk, and data disks A, B, and C. The game doesn't have a hard drive installer, so we have to boot it directly from the floppies. To watch the opening, we insert the opening disk in drive 1 and the visual disk in drive 2, but unfortunately the opening freezes up right away near the beginning on my PC98. It will only get through the entire thing if I set my CPU speed to middle, and even then, the FM music is screwed up. Likewise, while the game itself does seem to run, the FM sound still has the same issue. Turning the CPU all the way down to low does seem to make the sounds come out right, but then the entire game runs too slow. So, I did some research and apparently there is a rare issue that occurs in a few games where fast CPU speed messes up the FM sound. It probably doesn't help that I recently upgraded the CPU on this PC98 from the original 33MHz i486 to a 100MHz version. One way I found to fix the issue is to use a program called ErCache. This is usually known in the PC98 community as that program that lets you run floppy disk games from the hard drive, but the program actually bills itself as a game support system, like a Swiss Army knife for gaming on the 98. It has a ton of different tweaks you can enable to improve compatibility with old games, and even some quality of life improvements, most of which I'm not even going to pretend to understand. Sword Dancer also just happens to be the only game that has its very own command in ErCache, named /sword, which according to the devs gives you the optimal settings for running Sword Dancer. So now to watch the opening, I'm going to once again insert the opening and visual disks with DOS running. Then I'm going to run ercache.exe followed by the /sword command. This will significantly speed up disk loading times while playing the game. I'm going to also need this trap FM command to solve my sound issue. And for the opening to run correctly, I also need to disable the Intel 486 cache for some reason. Press enter and ErCache starts up and automatically boots the currently inserted floppies. Ah, everything working perfectly now. We see the TGL logo, and Biplane I gather is an alternate name for one of TGL's older divisions. Long ago, before the heaven and earth were separate, 2 dragons were at war. Through their conflict, they created the duality of the world, light and darkness, water and fire, sea and land, life and death. When their battle was over, the Dragon of Darkness was sealed away, while the Dragon of Light ascended to the heavens to watch life grow on the earth. The rest of the opening is all graphics and animation. The game initially appears to take place in a fictionalized version of old Japan, but in the game we'll also encounter a European-style kingdom, and even elves and gnomes, so the world of Sword Dancer seems to have a little bit of everything. The opening is actually really good for TGL's first game, even better than some of their later opening sequences. There's tons of nice artwork. Even some of the very minor characters are shown. The BGM incorporates the main battle theme from the game. Nice touch. Like the opening in Far Last Story 1, it just repeats over and over until you power off or reset. So now to start the main game, I'm going to eject both floppies and boot DOS from my hard drive again. This time I'll insert the Sword Dancer system disk, and then I'm going to need to run ERCache again. Let's make a batch file so that I don't need to type this out every time I start the game. Run the batch file and ERCache boots the system disk. First, we're asked to swap the system disk with the user disk here, if we have one. I don't, so I'll leave the system disk in. Check out the cursor on the menu. It's a dancing sword, get it? From the main menu, we can continue, start a new game, create user disk, switch the sound settings to use MIDI, versus mode, monster attack, or music mode. First, let's create a user disk. We are asked to insert a blank disk in Drive 2, and here we can select the difficulty level for the game. I'll be playing on normal. As the disc is being created, we get a mostly naked version of the character Teta running. Partway through, he falls and hurts himself. Finally, for some reason, Zizel hits him on the head with a mallet, and user disk creation is complete. So now we'll start a new game, and we're asked to put the user disk in Drive 1, and then data disk A in Drive 2. There's kind of a second opening sequence here, this one being more directly related to the plot. Our story begins in the mountain village of Suzaku, where the Dragon of Light is worshipped as a god. There, according to tradition, one girl is chosen as the Shrine Maiden, or Miko of the Dragon. She alone is able to hear the dragon's voice and pass his words onto the people. And in order to protect the Miko, the village has an elite team of fighters, who wield their swords as if in a dance. These fighters are, of course, known as the Sword Dancers. On this night, our young Miko named Setsuna has a sense that something terrible is about to happen, and like clockwork, she's attacked by a monster who says he was sent by his master, Juo. This is where our main protagonist jumps in, a young sword dancer named Hien. The monster flies off carrying Setsuna, with Hien barely hanging on. Unfortunately, the monster is eventually able to shake Hien off, sending him hurtling toward the earth, along with Setsuna's sacred dagger. Hien awakens in a village called Toto, and is given the sacred dagger which was found lying near him. He learns he was saved by a girl named Anna, who is out playing somewhere in the forest. We can come back here anytime to use this house as a free inn. To me, the graphics in this game look a little bit old and blocky for 1992, but they get the job done. It almost looks like a PC-88 game, though of course the PC-88 would never be able to handle characters this large at this speed. The one part of the game that really looks like PC-98 are the cutscenes. Anyway, we have a nice small RPG town to explore here with a few people to talk to. You can hold the B button to dash, so I hope you don't mind that most of my footage is going to have the characters zipping around the screen. You can also jump with the A button. We'll find a use for that later. The most important building in the towns is the inn, where we can not only save the game, but also buy healing items and a ring that will teleport us back to town. Quickly here, let me show you the difference between the FM music before and after the fix. The game only uses the old binaural FM soundboard, and even taking that into consideration, the FM arrangements are really quite poor here in TGL's first outing. Maybe average if I'm being nice. There is a lot of junk on PC-98 with crappy FM sound, after all. But here in Sword Dancer, even more so than other TGL games, you get a really huge upgrade if you have a MIDI module. The arrangements are far superior. Anyway, let's leave the town, and we immediately find our second party member, an older sword dancer named Teta, who has been looking for Hien. They set off in search of the flying monster that took Setsuna. So our first overhead section of the game is this forest here. While walking around, we'll run into random battle encounters where we fight monsters on this fighting game style screen. You can probably tell by looking at it, but this isn't exactly Neo Geo here. You have to look at it in context. This game was released only the following year after Street Fighter II hit Japanese arcades, and actually before Street Fighter II arrived in the home on the Super Famicom. And on top of that, PC-98 really isn't well suited to this genre. So it's a pretty rudimentary fighter with choppy animation and only 2 attack buttons. You can't even hold down the buttons for stronger attacks. The special moves are also pretty basic. You won't find any quarter circle forward motions here. Hien has a projectile executed by pressing forward plus both trigger buttons together, or both trigger buttons while jumping for a mid-air version. Lastly, he has sort of a flash kick executed by charging down then pressing up and B. This move is actually pretty useful when Hien is cornered. Luckily, the game lets you charge down while blocking. You only get 1 round. Lose a battle and it's game over. You're sent back to the last autosave, which usually occurs at each new screen transition. Win a battle and you gain gold and experience, just like in any RPG. Experience is gained by all party members, whether they fight or not, and level ups will gradually raise your HP max, strength, and defense, making the battles easier. You don't get your HP back after the battles, so you'll have to use healing items or change to a different character for a fresh meter. Open the menu by pressing escape, and most of these options here are pretty self-explanatory. To use items, you equip them here in the menu, and then use them on the overhead screen by pressing enter. Change the party leader if you want to fight as a different character. Teta is my personal favorite to play as. His air projectile and belly flop easily take down most enemies. Okay, it's a body slam, not a belly flop. In Sword Dancer, the cheapest strategy is always best. You can't run from battles, and you want to finish them with as much HP remaining as possible, so it's usually best not to try anything fancy. You're not going to be able to perform any killer combos in Sword Dancer anyway. The battle encounter rate may be a bit too frequent for some players' taste. Most old RPGs seem to give you a few steps after each battle where you can't get attacked, but Sword Dancer is completely random. Sometimes you'll walk forever without being attacked, and other times you'll take 1 step and get attacked again. Also, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but it's been a really long time on this channel since I last played a plain old overhead RPG with random battle encounters. So Sword Dancer actually scratches an itch that I had totally forgotten I had. It's exactly like playing a plain old traditional JRPG, just with the turn-based battles replaced with one-on-one fighting. If you think of the fighting parts as just an interesting replacement for turn-based battles, then they actually feel more than adequate. At least it's more interesting than just pressing the confirm button over and over when fighting easy battles where you just want everyone to attack. So hell, this is gonna be fun! Let's play through Sword Dancer. After some necessary grinding, we can venture further into the forest and find the girl Anna who saved Hien and escort her back to the village. There, Anna explains she was in the forest following voices she heard coming from a cave nearby. At the end of the forest area, we find the cave and easily move the boulder blocking the entrance out of the way. Inside, we find a traveler's inn, where we can save our game and buy items, just like the inn in town. I don't know what she's doing here in this blocked off cave, but I'm grateful anyway since it's a long way back to town. Here, staying the night is replaced with healing magic, since I guess it wouldn't make sense to spend the night in the cave. These inns appear at regular intervals in the game, so that there's always somewhere to save, even in the areas where it wouldn't make sense to have a town. In the cave, we have our first puzzle, a simple one where we just have to pull these 3 chains in the right order. We find a piece of paper saying to start with the one on the right, so it's pretty easy to figure out. Next, we have our first platforming section of the game. Wow, this game has everything, doesn't it? The platforming in Sword Dancer is not great, but thankfully it doesn't pose much of a challenge until the final sections of the game. The platforming parts don't have battle encounters, which would make them really annoying, and if you fall and die, you're never taken very far back, and I love how quickly you're back in the game due to the lack of any disc access before or after the game over screen. So after a nice little platforming section, we're at the end of the cave, where we overhear some ninjas talking. They're looking for jewels which fell from a falling star, to bring back to their master, Juo. They're also planning to kill this meddling girl they're holding, who apparently came snooping and now knows too much. Here we fight our first boss battle. These are quite a bit more substantial than the random monster encounters, and feel more like you're playing an actual fighting game. They can be a bit challenging, so you might want to use one of the game's power-up items, which temporarily raise your strength, defense, or HP for one battle. Defeat the ninja, and the girl introduces herself as Zizel. She also fancies herself pretty good with a sword, and so joins the party. Sword Dancer isn't especially text-heavy, but the dialogue that is here is pretty entertaining, consisting of interactions between the characters, rather than just dry exposition you might find in older RPGs. The graphics may be low in detail, but the dialogue makes this definitely an early 90s RPG here, not 80s. The party finds a jewel on the dead ninja, and they hear a voice in their heads. "Gather the jewels, find my pieces, and place them in the dagger." So I guess now we know what this part of the HUD is for. Obtaining each jewel constitutes basically one chapter of the adventure, though the game doesn't actually call them chapters. So we head back to the village. There I had found this girl earlier who said she lost her hat, and I noticed the hat sitting on top of Anna's house, though I had no idea how I could possibly get up there. However, now after having completed the first platforming section, I figured out you can jump on the windows of the house next door and get up on the roof. Then it was just a matter of doing a running jump. I was totally expecting to get something useful for bringing back the hat, but the girl only gives information about Zizel being lost in the woods. Well, that was worthless, but at least I finally got closure on that hat on the roof. With Zizel in the party, now we can get past this guard, and soon after we see the first of the game's regular cutscenes, which serve to cap off each section of the game. This one shows the main villain, Juo, interrogating Setsuna, who refuses to cooperate and says that Hien will come save her. Juo laughs and says that even if Hien comes, she won't be able to remember his name when he does. In the next area, Zizel suddenly leaves the party with little explanation. Hien and Teta arrive at the capital city, where Teta volunteers Hien to join a martial arts tournament. After winning 3 battles as Hien, we're about to be crowned champion when Zizel suddenly steps in and declares that the champion has to beat her as well. She whispers to Hien to let her win and not ask any questions. I think it would be cool if you had to actually play the battle and decide whether or not to let her win, but instead she just beats the crap out of Hien on the overhead view. Hien awakens in a castle, and we learn that Zizel is the princess of the kingdom. The purpose of the tournament was to find her a suitor. She tells Hien and Teta that if they need anything, they should definitely talk to one of the guards named Alucard, who is a really nice guy. But upon meeting him, he turns out to be a total asshole. Though he apparently doesn't have a drop of vampire blood in him, by the way. At a nearby church, a priest complains of rats in the attic, and we find a necklace and a fountain which we can exchange for a ladder. Use the ladder to get to the church attic, and we find the body of the real Alucard. Tell the king about the imposter, and we learn that Alucard has just taken Zizel out hunting, and we have to go save her. Alucard turns into a giant monkey we have to fight. Back at the castle, the king gives us the second jewel. Hien and Teta set off from the castle in the middle of the night in order to avoid any fanfare, but Zizel catches them in the act and insists on going along. In the second part of the cutscene, we are introduced to 2 of Juo's henchmen, Temujin and Agadil. Agadil volunteers to take on the party next, and Temujin says that he's under strict orders from Juo not to let her leave on her own. Still, Agadil eventually convinces Temujin to let her go. In the next part of the game, we visit a village of elves, and have to complete a sliding number block puzzle. At the end, the party meets Agadil for the first time. Hien and Teta mistake her for Setsuna, cause apparently she looks exactly like her. Agadil has no idea what they're talking about, and after defeating her and obtaining her jewel, our heroes decide to save her. Agadil at first questions why the party would take mercy on her, but she quickly decides to betray her master and join the party. She's curious about what Hien and Teta said about her being the spitting image of Setsuna. All she knows is that Juo raised her since childhood, and she suspects that she may be Setsuna's sister, stolen away as a child. Anyway, we now have all 4 party members of the game. The next cutscene is Juo talking to the Dragon of Darkness, who seems to be plotting his complete revival. The 2 dragons are actually named Sayward and Lazaward, by the way, but let's just call them the Light and Dark Dragons to make things less confusing. The villains decide to let the good guys bring all the jewels to them, since of course they're sure they can't be defeated even if they come. Oh, great plan. Next is a very short section in a new town, followed by a return to the kingdom where Zizel is from. Now the city has been taken over by the flying monster that kidnapped Setsuna, and the king is in prison. We get the next jewel, which the king had hidden in the waterway, but we then have to get through a pretty difficult dungeon maze in order to take on the monster. I was stuck here for a pretty long time and started to level up to a much higher level than what I was supposed to be at this point. The fighting for the rest of the game became pretty easy. After defeating the flying monster at the end, the next cutscene takes place at night on the castle balcony, where Zizel admits she gets jealous whenever Hien is nice to Agadil. After all, Agadil looks like Setsuna, Hien's childhood friend and presumed childhood sweetheart. She wishes Hien would pay attention to her instead. The party then sets off again, this time with the blessing of the king and queen. They've realized they're not going to be able to control Zizel, and believe she's in good hands with Hien. This is actually about the second time in the game they imply Hien would make a good suitor for their princess. Back in the town from earlier, the guy who has the next jewel is rumored to be at the bar, but it's closed now. We have to jump up here and climb down the chimney to get in.
Someone's breaking in! Well, just don't sit there, get the club!
There we find a secret passage that leads to a ninja castle. Okay. This is another kind of difficult maze where I ended up getting a ton of experience wandering and fighting battles. At the end, we fight Temjin, who of course is angry with Agadil for betraying them. We defeat him and gain another jewel, but the castle crumbles, sending our heroes deep into the ocean. They're saved by the Queen of the Sea, who grants them the ability to breathe underwater, but treats them quite coldly and tells them to leave. We then learn that the sea people need something called a magical stone to prolong the life of their underwater sanctuary, and we set off to retrieve it. This is where the platforming becomes a little difficult. We have to push these platforms into a viable pattern so that we can jump all the way to this exit in the upper right corner. Easier said than done. There are barely more than just enough platforms to accomplish this, and you have to be really careful about the distance you put between each one. Sword Dancer's platforming is difficult because you have fixed Castlevania-style jumps, where you can't control your trajectory after leaving the ground. There are also only 2 jump distances, depending on whether you're walking or running. So this was a considerable challenge, and though I managed, I can see some players potentially struggling with this and the later platforming sections. The Sea Queen is much kinder after bringing back the stone. She says she was only testing them earlier, and tells them the full story of the 2 dragons. Recently, the Dragon of Darkness was released from his seal by Juo, and he challenged the Dragon of Light to a rematch and destroyed him, dividing him into 8 jewels. But before the dragon was defeated, he created the Sacred Dagger, so that the 8 jewels could be placed in it, and used as the sole weapon that can defeat the evil dragon. Now the evil dragon is recovering from the battle, but if all 8 jewels should fall into his hands, he will become invincible. Our heroes obtain the next jewel and make their way toward Juo's castle, which lies beyond 2 caves. The first is an ice cave, which has a number of short puzzles. One of them is the other really difficult platforming section of the game. This time the platforms disappear after they've been stepped on. They can't be moved, but it's probably even more challenging due to the distance between each platform. You really have to jump from the exact right spot to make it to each one. The other really difficult part is the sliding blocks puzzle. You have to slide 2 of these blocks over these switches on the left side. This is harder than it looks. When the blocks are moved, they continue to slide until they hit something, and if they hit an immovable wall, they can no longer be moved in the opposite direction. Anyway, here's the ridiculous solution. Avert your eyes if you want to figure it out for yourself. This probably took me longer than any other part of the game, but I'm happy to say I figured it out without looking up the solution. At the end of the cave, we fight an ice griffin and obtain his talon. In the cutscene after, Teta asks the party to let him go on alone for the rest of the journey. The reason he gives is that he and Juo were old rivals who were training together to become sword dancers. But one day, suddenly Juo murdered their master, saying that rather than waiting around in the village for an enemy that may or may not come someday, he wants to leave and truly test his power. Since that day, Teta has sworn to avenge his master. The party of course doesn't let him go alone, but Zizel promises that Teta can have the final blow to defeat Juo, to which Teta replies, "Are you kidding? I'll finish him in one blow." Next is the Fire Cave. This is where I maxed out the party's experience at 65,535, so no more level ups. I still got stupidly stuck on this part where it says we need to find a way up on top of this ledge. Turns out you just have to use the Ice Griffin's talon. Oh yeah, probably should have tried that sooner. The platforming at the end of the stage is a lot easier than it looks. Watch me jump across some of these while we put up a spoiler warning for the final events of the game. We fight and defeat Temujin again, but afterward he decides to bring Teta to hell with him. Yep, Teta's gone. No choice but to leave his dead body as we grab the second last jewel. Now we're in Juo's castle. Partway through we'll fight some random kunoichi who lets Zizel win, but puts a curse on her. Zizel tells Hien she loves him before losing control of her body and attacking him. The secret to making this difficult battle easier is to arrive with Hien at max HP and Zizel with very little remaining. Zizel becomes the next character to die, but Hien promises her he'll defeat Juo. After some kind of difficult and confusing platforming, Hien and Agadil find themselves face to face with Juo. Hien demands that he hands over Setsuna, but Juo is like, "Setsuna is right there next to you." So yeah, Agadil isn't Setsuna's sister, she's Setsuna. Juo restores her memories and captures her again. His biggest mistake, Juo says, was not letting Temujin know Agadil's true identity so that he wouldn't let her go off alone. Juo convinces Hien to hand over the jewels in exchange for Setsuna, but when he does, Juo doesn't keep his side of the bargain. Here we fight Juo and actually kill him off pretty easily. But now all the jewels are in the hands of the Dark Dragon. Setsuna is sent away in a ball of light, and Hien has to climb the tower ahead to get to the dragon. So now we're down to just Hien as the sole party member. The tower consists of some not so difficult puzzles and platforming. At the end we learn that to the dragon, Juo was nothing but a useful idiot. Now the dragon has eaten all 8 of the crystals and is planning to eat Setsuna next. Just when Hien has no idea what to do, the dragon seems to be having indigestion from the crystals. The Dragon of Light is fighting back. I guess he barfs all the crystals out, because now Hien has them in his HUD. Actually the first time in the game where we have all 8 crystals. Hien asks the Light Dragon for strength, and it's the final battle. At first the dragon's HP meter doesn't go down, and I wondered if I was even hurting him at all. But keep attacking and it does eventually start going down. Using a power fruit to raise your attack power, and buying a whole bunch of elixirs from the shopkeeper at the bottom of the tower makes this actually doable. The elixirs are quite expensive, but they restore all your HP when you die. In the ending, the crystals seem to have transported Hien and Setsuna to a beach nearby, where they see the tower destroyed. Then Teta and Zizel just come along, and I wish the game would actually explain how they survived, because they both were made to look pretty dead earlier. I don't know, maybe they were revived by the Light Dragon, who we see standing over the tower in the next shot. And that's it. The party looks off into the horizon as the dragon flies away. So who made this, and can we find any familiar names from the Farland Story games? Well, Hiroyuki Kudo, listed here for map design, map editing, and character graphics, was one of the main programmers for much of the Farland Story series. Yoshitaka Nishi, listed in Sword Dancer for map design, graphics, opening graphics, and character graphics, does appear under Special Thanks in Far Land Story 1 and 2, but I have no idea what he actually did in those games. Finally, while the music in Sword Dancer was composed by someone named Yuko Hikino, the FM sound arrangements and sound effects were by Takahiro Yonemura, better known as Kemul. Kemul was a composer on the first 2 Far Land Story games, as well as several other TGL titles. He's still an active composer with a long career in game music. In my opinion, he did a fairly poor job with the FM arrangements in Sword Dancer, but I'll cut him some slack since I'm pretty sure this was one of his first games. So now let's return to the main menu. There's now a visual mode unlocked after finishing the game, where we can view all the graphics from the cutscenes as well as some unused graphics. If we want to try and play Sword Dancer like a regular fighting game, we have the Versus and Monster Attack modes. Versus is unfortunately pretty bare bones. You can only play as the 4 main characters, matches are still only 1 round, and there's no option to play against the CPU. If you happen to have the original Minoral 26 case on board, you get 2 joystick ports, but otherwise the second player has to use the keyboard, or maybe connect a second joystick using a keyboard emulator like I did. Again, the fighting here is quite simple, and I can't imagine this being fun for 2 people for very long. The Monster Attack mode seems like a wasted opportunity. I was actually looking forward to playing a series of matches against the computer, or maybe a survival mode with a single HP meter, but alas, all you can do is play a single match against 1 monster from any of the dungeons in the game, and again you can only play as the 4 main characters. There are no ports of Sword Dancer, it's only for PC 98. But there were 2 special Sword Dancer games released later at budget prices. The first is Sword Dancer Zoukango, which means special issue, like a special issue of a magazine. This one is simply a fighting game, and all the shortcomings of the Versus and Monster Attack modes in the original are addressed here. You can now also play as 3 of the enemies from the game. Matches are the standard first to win 2 rounds, and you have win quotes after each match. There are a few new added moves here and there, as well as small tweaks to the way certain moves work, that at least I was able to notice after having played through the first game. The biggest addition has got to be the throws, which are performed with the punch button when in close proximity, similar to other fighting games. In addition to the standard Versus, there's a tournament mode where you can face off against up to 7 friends or computer-controlled characters. And the Monster Attack mode this time is a full-fledged 1-player arcade experience, complete with endings for each character. And even though this is only TGL's second game, they already added a hard drive installer here. The one big shortfall of this game, however, is the lack of any new BGM. It's all reused crappy tracks from the original. The next year though, we got Sword Dancer Zoukango 93. Now we're talking. Though this one still has only Minoral FM, the music is all new and sounds so much better. The stage backgrounds are also new, and the roster now has 9 playable characters, in addition to being able to play as Temjin and the Knight from the original game for the first time. There are 3 characters who never fought in the original at all. First is Anna, the girl who saved Hien at the beginning of Sword Dancer. Setsuna is now also a playable character. Wait, there's both Setsuna and Agedil? Lastly, the shopkeeper from the original game is now a character, who throws power-ups as projectiles. By typical video game logic, you'd think you'd want to get hit by those. This one again has a whole new set of character endings for the Monster Attack mode, and most importantly, there's an all-new Sugoroku or board game mode. Roll the dice and land on spaces that either give bonuses or set you back. Land on the same space with another character and you have to fight. Loser gets sent back and the winner gains experience. This might look like a boring idea, but I had a surprisingly great time with this mode. It's actually really fun and challenging. Bad luck can do you in, but being good at the battles will definitely give you an edge. Zoukango 93, I dare say, is actually a pretty decent fighting game package as a whole, at least by PC 98 standards. The last Sword Dancer game is finally a proper sequel, Sword Dancer Kyojin no Megami, often called Sword Dancer 2. To put it simply, it's a Zelda clone. It has a Zelda 1 style screen-by-screen overworld and dungeons. The graphic style, on the other hand, is obviously modeled after Link to the Past. You can see the enemies coming on the overhead screen, and the battle system has also been completely rebuilt from the ground up, though it looks a bit pixelated, probably for performance reasons. Anyway, it's too weird that this exists, but also way too much fun. I've definitely got to do a full video on this one in the future. The original Sword Dancer is a pretty decent RPG, though on a channel where we also review Neo Geo games, I can't in good conscience call it a good fighting game. Taken as a whole though, it actually works pretty well for what it is. They came up with a pretty good concept for how to execute a fighting game RPG in 1992, and I for one really enjoyed my playthrough of this game. It's another one I'm glad I bothered to finally sit down and play to the end. Thanks for watching this episode of PC98 Paradise. It was made possible by the people you see on your screen, as well as viewers like you. Hope to see you back here again for something else fun in the near future. This has been Mr. Jakes at Basement Brothers. Bye for now.